Hey guys, Matthew here, and due to popular request, I decided I was going to make a build guide on my Tornado Shot Omniscience stacking build. So before anything else, I want to say that this video is going to be pretty long, and I highly recommend you just grab yourself some popcorn, lay back, throw your feet up, and listen to what I have to say, because there's a lot of things on this build which are extremely specific, and if you don't follow them, you are potentially going to break the build, and then you're going to come back and be like, this build doesn't work. But then I'll look at your POB and I'll be like, my guy, you did not follow exactly what I said. It is very, very important because there's a lot of moving parts to this build, and a single missing one can break the whole experience, okay? I just want to get that out of the way. Now, before anything else as well, I got to give a huge shout out to Somayd. Link in the description to his Twitch and his YouTube channel. Drop a sub, drop a follow, etc. And the reason for that is because this idea of this build all came from a clip that he posted on Twitter where he killed a Guardian map very, very quickly on a bow build, and I was like, that looks pretty good. I've got to look into it. And then I asked him to share the POB. He sent it over to me, and then I decided to work from there. So essentially what I'm saying is that all the credit for this build essentially goes to him. I've definitely changed some things. I've definitely scaled it a little bit differently in some cases, but still huge shout out to Somayd. Okay, now before anything else, as always, I kind of want to quickly showcase to you guys how the build looks like in action, because, you can decide whether it's a build that you would enjoy playing or not. So what you're about to see is a Guardian map T16 where I am basically on a 1x version of this build, and not only is this a 1x version of the build, it's a rushed 1x version of the build, which has about half of the damage of the new 1x version of the build, which you can find in the POB down below when it comes to single target. So here's kind of what this build looks like in terms of clearing maps. Now, to be fair, this map has no map mods. It's just a white double Guardian map, as you'll see when we get into the boss fight. But, it is very capable of just one-shotting everything when it comes to T16s. And this is on, like I said, 1x budget, a build that the version that I built on stream. So very, very cheap stuff there. Okay, now looking at the single target of this build, you'll see that this is a double Guardian map, like I mentioned, where you have Guardian's Aid. When a Guardian reaches 33% HP, he's going to spawn with an ally, and they're both full health. And again, this has about half the damage of what the new 1x version of this build actually has, because I've made some pretty significant changes in order to increase the single target damage, which should not really affect the clear at all. Okay, so looking at the damage, you'll see that it's not like I'm one-shotting this thing. I would say that the 1x version of my Seismic Trapper definitely had more damage, but it was also a much slower clearing build, and it had a much lower ceiling as a build in general. So this is definitely some pretty respectable damage. I've definitely seen builds of, upwards of 20-30x do less single target damage than that. So overall, not bad at all. Okay, now if you're wondering, but what about the juiced up, right? So what we have here is a 6-man HP Maven kill, and if you don't know, that means that Maven here has 330 million health, and everything's dead, so I'm the only person who is going to do any damage to her. So as you can see, I've done about half her HP by now, and then I've got to dodge a few things, and there you go, she's dead. So if you time that, it took me about 8 seconds or so of to kill her, and only about 6 of those seconds was damage uptime because I had to dodge the projectiles, which means I'm doing about 50 or 60 million damage on my current version of the build. However, my version of the build is actually not optimized for single target DPS. You can get quite a bit more damage than this if you were to optimize in single target, which is what I did, the changes that I made when it comes to the POBs, which I'm about to showcase to you guys. In reality, if I made the changes in the POBs in my actual build, I would be just about doubling my single target damage, and the reason for that is overlapping projectiles, but we'll get to that a little bit when we get into the Ascendancy choices. Okay, now that I've gotten that out of the way, let's get into the extreme budget POB, because again, there's a lot of things I need to explain, both in terms of how POB calculates damage on this build, and of course, what you're going to be looking for. So it all starts with our bow here, and one thing that you need to make sure that you do, this is extremely important, is you need a priority of cold damage on this build. Essentially, we're going to be abusing this mechanic called Brittle, and what Brittle does is it changes your ability to chill or freeze monsters into the ability to inflict Brittle, and Brittle is going to give you base critical strike chance based on how big your hit is. So we need to prioritize cold, especially on the budget version, since we are doing, fairly small amount of damage, in order to get high Brittle amount and for the build to actually get critical strike chance. Here's the thing. If I look at the actual tornado shot, I have 100% critical strike chance with 8% brittle. But if I turn off brittle, I have 40% critical strike chance. So it's extremely important that we prioritize cold damage on our bow in order to proc brittle. Now, we can't just get cold damage and call it a day. We will need at least one more element. It doesn't need to be a tri-element bow, but it does need to have at least one more element due to Trinity. So I need to quickly explain what Trinity does, as it's one of our support gem. Essentially, Trinity requires you to have alternating highest damage hits on your build. Whenever you have a highest damage hit, it's going to give you 25 resonance of each of the 2 other elements, which is why we need to have an alternating of 2 different highest hits in order to get all 3 actual resonance at 25. And as you can see, Trinity is about 23% damage on our build. It's basically one of the best supports we can have. So it's extremely important that we make it work. Now, to give a quick explanation of how you're going to make sure that your Trinity is actually going to work. So let's just say I was to go into a Blood Aqueducts here and I shoot out my, I just shoot. You'll see an icon is going to appear right here with a little circle. And basically, as you can see, there's 2 resonance right now and I'm missing the 3rd one, right? But if I just shoot a few more times, you'll see that the 3rd one is actually going to start, appearing. And the reason for that is because the first hit might have been, the highest hit might have been cold, the second hit might have been cold as well, but then the 3rd hit was actually lightning, right? And therefore, all 3 resonance were able to pop up. Now, you're pretty much going to always have all 3 resonance up as long as you listen closely to what I'm about to say. In order to make sure that your resonance or your Trinity is actually going to function, basically, we are prioritizing cold. I already mentioned that. But what we're going to make sure that we do is we're going to make sure that the low end of our cold damage, the lowest possible amount of cold damage that we can do, is lower than the highest amount of damage that we can do with either lightning or fire. What that means essentially is that when the damage rolls, right, whenever the game decides how much damage we're going to do, which is in between this and that, sometimes it's going to roll really high on the cold damage, right? And really low on the lightning damage. So this means I'm going to have my highest damage is going to be cold. However, sometimes the cold damage is going to roll pretty low, and then the lightning damage is going to roll really high. So as long as the low end of our cold is at least lower than the high end of our lightning or fire, it means that whenever cold decides to roll pretty low, as long as there's a bit of a margin between these, then lightning is going to be able to do a higher damage roll, or fire is going to be able to do a higher damage roll, and this is going to make sure that we have permanent uptime on our Trinity. So looking at cold damage on this build, we have a low end of 7,000. Meanwhile, our lightning is 13,000. So this is a pretty massive actual difference. So Trinity would work absolutely perfectly on this build. And even fire also has a high end than the low end of cold, which means sometimes fire would even be the one that is giving us, the highest hit. So this would be exactly what you want to get, something around there. Now, the cool thing is that let's just say that your bow only had 2 elements, right? Let's just say that you only had cold because it's a priority and then lightning, but you didn't have fire. That is still fine, right? And let's just say that your bow had cold and fire and then no lightning. That is also still fine. And even if there's no other fire anywhere else on your build, just on your bow. So let's just say that the high end of my fire would be 6,000 and the low end of my cold is 7,000, and I would have no lightning on my bow. I can also fix that using my Herald, because I can change Herald of Ice to Herald of Thunder if that is going to basically help me with my damage here. But it's extremely important that you pay attention to this on PoB, because otherwise, again, this is one of those things that can completely brick your build. All right, now that I've explained that, looking at the other items, we're just going to go with a regular Quiver. Now it's going to be super important that our Quiver has accuracy. Otherwise, we will need it on our gloves. If we don't have the accuracy on the gloves, we need it on the Quiver. If we don't have it on Quiver, we need it on gloves, which means the accuracy roll on the Quiver could be on the gloves, and therefore the attack speed that I have on the glove could be crafted on the Quiver instead. They are alternative. You can alternate them, but it's important that you have at least one, because otherwise your hit chance is going to suffer. So you'll see if I take off my Quiver, I only have a 92% hit chance. So the reason why we need accuracy on this build, which most builds typically never need accuracy, is because of Omniscience, which is turning off all of our dexterity, and therefore we lose a ton of accuracy because of that. So we need to invest into it a little bit more. So that's why we got to do that. Okay, next, Gale Sight. Now, Gale Sight is going to be what's going to be applying the Brittle instead of the Freeze and Chill on the budget version, since Secrets of Suffering is way too expensive to consider it on a budget version. Okay, our chess piece is going to be a Brisk Wrap. The reason for that is because it's a 20 chaos chess piece and it gives us about 10% damage. So overall, the budget version is going to get quite a bit of value out of this chess piece. It also has a little bit of resistance, so why not? It's better than, say, a Tabula, and it's a lot cheaper than, say, a Hires Ire, because you can get it 6 link for, again, like 20-30 chaos. So very solid chess piece there. Gloves, very important that we get spell suppression on both on our gloves in order to get capped on spell suppression, because we don't have Hires Ire, which is 30% spell suppression, which we will have on the higher budget versions. So on the gloves, we are going to get an actual spell suppression roll, and we're also going to get a spell suppression implicit. Now, if you don't know what that is from the blue, the Eater of World actual influence, but you only need 7%, which is the lowest possible roll, which means you can use the cheapest possible Eldritch currency and just kind of spam it. It's got about a 3% chance to roll, so it should cost you about 30 chaos to get this chance to suppress damage. And if you can't afford it at the very beginning, that's okay. It's not mandatory, but you'll definitely want to make it a priority. All right, Aziri's boots, they have a lot of spell suppression, decent life, good evasion, good move speed, overall solid pair of boots for cheap. Now, the item that basically makes this build function is Crystallized Omniscience. Now, for those who don't know what that is, it's a mechanic which allows you to turn attributes into Omniscience, which Omniscience is giving you all resistance every 10 Omniscience and also 1% pen. So as you can see, we have over 1,000, which is about 100% penetration, elemental penetration on this build. To put it into perspective, a Watcher's Eye with, say, cold penetration while affected by hatred is 15% at best. This amulet here is absolutely busted, and I do expect it to get nerfed in the future. So use it while you can, because this is essentially what makes bow builds as, you know, strong as they currently are. Without this amulet, bow builds would pretty much go right back to where they were, which has been extremely weak for quite some time now, until you invest a pretty significant amount of currency into them. Okay, so quick explanation of Omniscience, because it's not as black and white as it might seem. Omniscience has a few things you need to know about it. First off, it doesn't care if you're stacking Strength, Dex, or Intelligence, because it all turns into Omniscience and then it's multiplied. Therefore, what it means is all stats on this build, be it flat Strength, Dex, or Intelligence, or, you know, for example, percent increase to Dexterity, Intelligence, or Strength, those are all treated equally. So there is no priority to like, oh, I'm going to make sure that I get Dex instead of Int. They're worth the exact same thing. Another thing you need to know is that attributes like all attributes, which you would think is giving you, 3 times the amount of Omniscience, doesn't actually work. So for example, if you have a ring with 15 all attributes, it would only give you 15 Omniscience, not 45. And the same thing, for example, a bow, a craft on your bow, which is giving you Dexterity and Intelligence, you would think this is giving me 30 Omniscience, but it's only giving me 15. Very important that you remember that. Because there is, you could lose a lot of potential power if you're focusing on double and triple attributes instead of single attributes. So, first off, it takes all of the total amount of Strength, Dex, and Int that you have, which is not actually multiplied by anything. It's not scaled. It's just the amount of flat, and then it takes that total amount, it turns it into Omniscience, which, as you can see, I have a base of 653 on this PoB, and then it's going to multiply it by all of my increases to attributes. So, for example, my amulet has an Anoint, which is Utmost Intellect, which is 8% Intelligence, but I also have Utmost Swiftness, which is 8% Dexterity. The way that it works is it's going to add all those increases, so 8% Intelligence plus 8% Dexterity plus my belt giving me 16%, right? So that's a total of like 32% attributes, and it's going to change it to Omniscience and therefore multiply my base by that amount. So as you can see, I'm getting 26, 39, and 24 for a total of 1.57. And there's also the 32% reduced here from the double and triple. So for example, my belt, right, which is giving me 16% attributes, you would think this is 16% Strength, Int, and Dex, but it's actually only 16% Omniscience. So it's removing 32% from that. So instead of being, say, 26, 39, and 24, in reality it's 26, 39, 24 minus 32 for a total of 57. Then it's multiplying my base, and that's where I get my total of 1025. Okay, now that I've explained that, let me explain the last line because this seems to be very confusing to a lot of people. Attribute requirements can be satisfied by X% of omniscience. Essentially what that means is that this is going to dictate how much omniscience you need on your build in order to be able to equip your items. So if I go, and you can see at the very bottom here, it says omniscience required 895. But if I had a worse roll on my amulet, let's just say instead of having a 20% roll, I had a 15% roll, you'll see that the Omni required would be 1,193. So the better the roll, the least amount of omniscience that you need. Now, in the build, I made sure to prioritize getting quite a bit of omniscience. So a roll that is midway, right, about 10 chaos or so, 20 chaos, like 20% roll should be plenty as long as you are following the PoB, which it's almost entirely just unique items when it comes to omniscience, so that should be very easy to do. Okay, now our ring. Very, very important that we get a Shaper ring because this is going to activate our Mark of the Elder. We're just looking for attributes. And then one thing that is absolutely mandatory is the non-channeling skills have -7 mana cost. Now, this is going to stack alongside the Replica Conquerors on the budget version because Mark of the Elder is actually very, very strong for this build. But without 2 of these non-channeling, we were actually losing a ton of freedom on our build in terms of mana cost. As you can see, this mana cost here is 12, but we are attacking like 5 times per second. So it's very important that we get this mana cost as low as possible, which for us is going to be 12 on a budget with the Replica and the -7. And that is going to be that's going to feel very, very good because we are also getting 5 mana gain for each enemy hit and 2 here for a total of 7 mana gain for each enemy hit. And we have a lot of arrows, so this shotguns, so essentially we're just constantly going to be full on our mana, which is going to allow us to have, very little of mana unreserved and still be able to play the build. Very important, however, that we prioritize getting a little bit of attributes on this ring. Something like 60 total should be plenty. And we are going to need, very important, to get fire and lightning resistance because we get a lot of cold resistance from our Brisk Scrapper and our Gale Sight, but we don't actually get any fire or lightning anywhere else on the build. And we are strapped for points at level 90 on this build, so it's very important that we have a fire and lightning base or like an all elemental resistance base. Otherwise, you might run into some issues at level 90, something that we'll fix later on. Okay, Mark of the Elder, very simple ring, very cheap, something like 10 chaos, 20 chaos for a pretty good roll on the attack damage. And yeah, this thing is pretty damn strong and also pretty good for life, flat cold damage to attacks. Overall, just a solid ring. Cyclopean Coil. Now, what I really like about Cyclopean Coil, and the reason why I go about it, is it has a lot of flat life, and the percent attribute is also strong, but it also gives you cannot be frozen if dexterity is higher than intelligence, and because we are a ranger character, our base attributes, dexterity is always going to be 32, our strength 14, and our intelligence 14, and these base attributes are not converted to omniscience, because if you look at the amulet, it says modifiers to attributes, and these are not modified. These are just your base amount, which means your dexterity is always going to be higher than in your intelligence, and everything is going to be converted to omniscience. Therefore, you're basically immune to being frozen, so this is a super solid belt for this build. Now, I've already mentioned Replica Conqueror's efficiency for the minus mana cost, pretty much mandatory. Now, Lethal Pride is just pretty good because it gives us a lot of attributes. Due to the fact that every single node that we have put it into here, so all of these traveling nodes are going to give us 2 attributes, and then all of the nodes that are leading up to notables are also going to be giving us some attributes as well. So that's essentially kind of what we're going to be rocking with, and it's pretty good. Now, you could also, instead of using a Lethal Pride, use a Brutal Restraint. But Lethal Pride, in my opinion, is better because you can get nodes like double damage on them. You can get percent strength. You can get intimidate. You can get stuff like that. But overall, you don't need anything to make this build work on your Lethal Pride. And just to showcase, this Lethal Pride here is giving us something like, I don't know, from 7.5 to 8.3 million damage. So it's actually quite a bit of damage from just socketing in. And it's also very, very cheap. Also, it gives us a ton of omniscience, which is required in order to equip our gear. So it's very important that we get one of these. And finally, Lioneye's Fall. This is a 10C jewel, and it's going to convert all claw nodes to bow nodes. So we take all this really, really good claw stuff and all this really, really good claw stuff Also going to allow us to get the Claw Mastery for sustain of both life and mana. So this jewel is extremely strong on this build. Kind of mandatory, to be honest, because if you remove this, you're going to start lacking a lot of crit chance. If you remove this, you're going to suffer on attack speed. So overall, Lioness Fall is a very solid option. Now, I would highly recommend you do the exact same tree that I'm advertising for here. Don't start messing around with anything else. Definitely try to get the exact items that I have here, because otherwise there's a good chance that you brick the build. There's some choices that I made. For example, this mastery here with effective non-damaging ailments is in order to get brittle, right? Now, we are not going to be hitting very hard on a build with such low investment. We're only hitting for about 200,000 damage per arrow, which means we are going to need to increase our effective non-damaging ailments, which brittle is a non-damaging element, in order to get more brittle. Now, the config is at 8% brittle, and this is pretty fair. I don't think you should have any issues getting to 8%, but if you lose this 40%, and you're sitting here hitting a boss and you have only 5% brittle, don't ask yourself why, okay? There's a reason why I made the choices that I made. Okay, now that's pretty much it for the budget version. Now, I do want to finish off by talking about the Ascendancy, because everything else, again, you should really be sticking to exactly what I have here. So looking at this, we're obviously going to be getting Gathering Winds. This is going to give us Tailwind, which is great. You know, it's more damage, but also more move speed, more totem placement speed, and it's just overall very solid. Next, Focal Point. Now, this is extremely important because marks on this build are broken, as you'll see when I go into the skill gem setup. So definitely something that we want. Ricochet is our third Ascendancy. It gives us Chain, which is going to allow us to obviously get a lot more clear, but also gives us projectiles 30% chance to chain when colliding with terrain, which is really nice for, you know, basically shotgunning bosses that are close to walls, which is pretty strong. So that's why we get that, but also because we need to get to endless munitions for, you know, skills fire 2 additional projectiles. This is going to feel really good and help you a ton with both your clear and your single target. Now, you might be wondering why I didn't go with Far Shot, and the reason for that is because I don't think it's actually the best in slot for this build. I think going with Point Blank is going to feel a lot better, especially because your positioning is going to be significantly less important. You'll be able to kind of just sit closer to the bosses and do way more damage than Far Shot. Now, why is that? Here's a quick explanation of why I don't think Far Shot is particularly good. So this build is all about getting as many projectiles as possible, as you'll see in the more budget PoBs. So if I was to get Far Shot, in order to get the maximum amount of value from my Far Shot, I need to be 70 units, whatever that is, away from the boss to get maximum damage, which is about 2/3 of your screen, right? So around here, so the boss would need to be around there for me to get maximum damage. Now, the problem with that is, as you can see, the more arrows you have, they shoot in a cone, right? They don't shoot in a straight arrow. Now, you could make them shoot in a straight arrow with greater volley, but it's still the arrow is still going to become wider and wider as you add projectiles to it. So because of this, the further you're shooting, the more spread your projectiles have, and therefore the least amount of overlap, which is why we go Point Blank. If the boss was right here, I can easily hit the boss with every single one of my projectiles and shotgun him for as much damage as humanly possible, despite the fact that on paper, Far Shot would do more damage if it was able to hit as many projectiles. The thing is, it can't, right? There are far too many projectiles and too much spread for the boss to get hit by all of them, so we are going to go with Point Blank instead. And Point Blank is just a basic 30% more damage when the enemies are close, so you'll probably want to be sitting around somewhere here to the bosses, so you'll put your totems down and then you'll just absolutely blast them, and that's going to be that. Alright, so that's pretty much it for the budget PoB. We're looking at roughly 8 million DPS. Now, for those who are wondering how I calculate the damage on PoB, you'll see that we have power charges, we have frenzy charges, gale force is at 7 because it's kind of hard to maintain 10 unless you're constantly hitting. Tailwind, we're leeching because there are nodes on the tree. Lowest resonance is at 50 because I've already explained that we make sure that we always have all 3 resonance at 50. Projectile distance is at 10, so again, we're going to be very close to the bosses to make Point Blank as valuable as it can be. Brittle is at 8%. I'm not putting shock or anything like that, even though you could get shock on this build, or you will get shock, because we are not Secrets of Suffering, therefore we don't get access to sap. We only get access to Brittle because of the Gale Sight. So that's another bit of damage that you are also going to be getting, but I'm not accounting for it. And of course, we are on Cyrus config. Now, looking at the skill setup, Tornado Shot, Wed, Crit Damage, Inspiration, Trinity, and Greater Multiple Projectiles, I would recommend just don't mess around with these. These are your best links, and there's a reason why every single one of these things is there. Trinity is just a high damage support. Inspiration is there because we kind of need it for mana costs. Increased crit damage is just one of the best supports because we are using Brittle to get as much crit as possible. And then GMP for actual shotgunning. Without GMP, even if this says 26% less projectiles or less damage, right, you would think it's 26% less damage, but since it's adding 4 projectiles to your build, and let's say you only have 4, this is technically giving you 100% more damage when you're getting 100% overlap. So this is by far one of the best supports for single target in the game, so don't be fooled by the 26% less on the build. Okay, next, Precision is going to be at level 10. Now, you might be able to get lower level than that in order to have more mana, or you might need it more, higher level than that. It will depend on how much accuracy you get on either your Quiver or your gloves, as I mentioned earlier on the video. Grace for defense. Anger is just a super high damage aura. As you can see, this is giving us about 20% damage, so very solid aura. And then our Herald, which is either Ice or Thunder, depending on what you need for your Trinity. There's not really any difference in terms of damage either. Sniper's Mark is absolutely mandatory, links to mark on hits. This is going to automate your mark, and as you can see, Sniper's Mark is giving us 90% more damage. It is absolutely insane, and if you don't have that on your build, it's going to feel really bad, and because it's automated with mark on hit, we don't have to worry. This is also giving us Culling Strike, because we get Culling Strike against marked enemies, so overall, this is insane for this build. Blood Rage for both leech and attack speed. Steel Skin is what we go for our guard skill of choice, and the reason for that is because we don't have any armor, so Molten Shell doesn't really have any value, and we don't get access to endurance charges, so in my opinion, Immortal Call is also not great, and we're kind of lacking sockets. So Steel Skin, put it on left click and just forget about it is really nice. All right, our helmet is going to have Arcanist Brand, Power Charge on Crit, Hydrosphere, and Tornado. Now, Arcanist Brand is in order to automate everything. Now, on a higher budget, you will have Asnath's Chant once you get the Secrets of Suffering Jewel, but you don't get access to that early, so you need to automate your Hydrosphere and Tornado. So we put an Arcanist Brand, which is going to take care of getting us Power Charges, which are mandatory. As you can see, if I take out the Power Charges, my crit chance goes to 90%, and that is with a Diamond Flask on. Without the Diamond Flask, I'm at 92%. Without the Diamond Flask or the Power Charges, I'm at 76%. So it's very, very important. Now, 92% is more than enough. So if ever your Diamond Flask goes down, it is a bit of DPS, but it's not the end of the world. Okay. Otherwise, obviously, we're using Hydrosphere. This is not that much damage, but it does give us a little bit of damage because of the exposure. But the real reason why we use it is because our projectiles can chain off of it. Now, it's been nerfed pretty heavily, but it's still a little bit of damage. And then Tornado, it's kind of like the new old Hydrosphere. Our projectiles are going to chain off of that. It's not incredibly strong compared to the old Hydrosphere, but it's still quite a bit of damage for single target, and because it's automated through Arcanist Brand, you don't really have to think about it. All right, next we are going to also have a Ballista setup on a 5-link on the budget setup. So we're going to use a 6-link body armor, and then we're going to have a 5-link bow, right, because that's really, really cheap. And that's where we're going to put our Ballista. And then in our last socket on our bow, which is not linked, is going to be our movement ability. And that's going to be it for the actual budget POB. Now, moving on to the extreme budget, the 1 Exalt or so budget. Moving on to the budget POB, this is around 5x. Now, the biggest difference is that we're going to get a 5-link High-Res instead of the Brisk Wrap. We're not really going to change anything else. You'll see that everything else is pretty much the same bow, same quiver. We are going to be getting Intimidate on our gloves, however. This is also really cheap. You're going to use the cheapest Eldritch currency, the red one. So let's see. This one right here. You're going to be using the lesser Eldritch Ember in order to get this modifier here. It's about a 1% chance, so it should cost you about 100 chaos to get this Intimidate, but it's 10% more damage, so it's quite good. Now we are going to be moving away from the Adziri step and getting a pair of boots with a little bit of attributes instead. This is going to give us more damage. And that's really it, but it's very important that we get T1 spell suppress on both our gloves and our boots, right? If we don't have that, it's going to be hard to cap our spell suppression, so you'll need T1, and then the 7% from the Eldritch modifier. Nothing else really changes. We're still rocking the exact same ring, same belt, same Mark of the Shaper. Now, one thing that you'll see on the tree changed a little bit because of some of the changes that we were able to make on the gear. Mostly what changes is that we were able to get some more effective non-damaging elements. So in this case, I put a 9% brittle effect, which means we need to invest into less critical strike chance. And I also took this for more resistances. And we are going to start setting up for the cluster jewel. So I took this jewel here, and this is a very important jewel to cap out our resistances because we are going to have a hard time capping out resistances until we get significantly more omniscience than that. However, as you can see, the other PoB had about 8 million damage on about a 1x budget or so. This is about 5x budget and has 14 million damage. So this is going to start really smacking content. This is what you'll start looking at if you want to farm things like the invitations. Maybe not quite the fear, but it should be able to do it depending on how good you are mechanically. But this is a lot of damage for 5x. There's not many builds on 5x budget that can dish out this kind of damage on like a 5-link and stuff like that. So that's kind of what we're looking at in terms of the changes. Otherwise, not much has changed. Again, I would highly recommend you stick to the exact PoB that I'm giving you guys and look for items that look as close as possible to the items that I have. What I would recommend is grab the PoB, and then when you go to buy your items, you can actually Control-C and Control-V them into the PoB to see what sort of difference you're gonna have on the item to make sure that you're not buying things which are significantly worse, even though they might not look like it. Okay. Now, moving on from the budget version, we're going to go to the mid-budget. Now, the mid-budget is around 20x investment. Now, this is where we are going to invest into Secrets of Suffering. This is also where we're going to change to a large cluster, which is going to allow us to drop the leech nodes that we had over here. And, of course, go Secrets of Suffering. Now, this is level 91, so we're a little bit higher level than the previous PoBs at level 90. But this allows us to go Asnash Chant. Now, this is a huge upgrade to this build because it means we no longer need the brand. And this means we are going to have automated power charges, automated tornado, automated hydrosphere, automated sniper's mark. And this is, it's not going to give us a ton of more damage than before, but the fact that it's automated, right, from just attacking, as you can see, my hydrosphere is being just kind of moved all over the place as I attack, is going to feel a lot better on the build. And this is where I think this build really starts to shine when we get a little bit of automation. Otherwise, we're going to get our second 6-link setup at this point on our Ballista, which is quite a bit of damage, actually. Something like 30-40% more damage on the build. Our Ballistas are very, very strong. Otherwise, we are going to get a little bit of a better bow, right? So a little bit more damage, maybe a little double damage action. So we're moving on from like the 10C bow to like maybe a few exalt on the bow there. But everything else is mostly the same, you know, the 6-link Hyries being the upgrade. Everything else, as I said, yeah, still rocking Mark of the Shaper, still Cyclopean Coil, still that Shaper ring to activate the Mark of the Elder, still the same amulet, still the same... the same anoint as well, and the jewels, not much has changed there. Still rocking the Lethal Pride and the Lioneye's Fall. So yeah, very, very similar, but our damage went up pretty considerably at 21 million damage, and this is not fluffed. You can go through the PoB and you'll see that this is actually the sort of damage that you can expect on this build. Now, moving on to a little bit more investment, around 50 Exalt, you're going to get 32 million damage. So there's actually a little bit less of a jump from the 20x to the 50x than, say, from the 5x to the 20x. And that's because at this point, you're starting to look at upgrades which are going to cost a lot more in order to really start getting a lot of damage. So from the 30x to the 50x version, one of the main changes is that we're going to start getting a little bit better items just overall. So our basically our gloves are going to have dexterity, which they didn't have before. You know, our boots are going to have a little bit more attributes. Our ring is going to have a little bit more juice on it, right? But most of it is actually going to stay the same. However, we are going to get an actual good, proper cluster at this level of investment, and we are going to start investing into, obviously, quality on our gems and stuff like that. But there's not really too big of a change. It really is just going to come down to the fact that the items are going to start being better overall. Instead of having, you know, 1 attributes on our ring or 2 attributes, we'll have 3 attributes, stuff like that. Better rolls, like 18% instead of 15% on our Cyclopean Coil, you know, better roll on our Mark of the Elder, but not much is going to change until we start investing pretty significant currency. But still, 31 million damage is at the point where you're able to do the Fear. You can do Maven with your eyes closed. That is more than enough damage that you'll ever need. Now, moving on to the actual endgame, or not endgame, but high budget. So this is around 100x. We are sitting at a comfortable 56 million damage. So at this point, we are really just starting to rock the place. We're going to start doing some pretty serious damage. We're going to include some medium budget clusters, and the reason for that is because we have a big jump in Omniscience, which means we don't need to invest into elemental resistances anymore, and we're also going to start getting Awakened Gem. Awakened GMP is a massive buff to this build. So something like that, we're going to get more overlap on our build through having more projectiles. This is also when we're going to get a bow with +1 arrow on our implicit. We're going to get a quiver with +1 arrow on a suffix, right? So arrows are incredibly strong for this build. Those are mostly going to be the changes from the 50 to the 100x, is like better bow, better quiver. Everything else is going to stay the same pretty much, except the fact that we're going to drop that mark of the Elder in order to get a lot more omniscience with fractured rings. Now these rings are actually quite easy to make. We're just going to spam some essences of either dexterity or intelligence if you have fractured strength or whatever, basically whatever attributes you don't have on a fractured ring with a single attribute until you get the last attribute, and then you kind of craft on the non-channeling and you call it a day. If you also want to have life on the ring, what you need to do is suffix lock and then hit it with a veiled chaos, craft on mana, unveil for the life, and then craft on the non-channeling. That's how you'll end up with these rings. You can make them for significantly cheaper than what they are available for on trade. But yeah, these are the kind of rings you'll be looking for. Now, I highly recommend getting amethyst rings because they're going to give you chaos resistance, which is also going to allow us to drop this chaos resistance wheel that I had on the previous budget versions. Because the amethyst rings is going to help us a lot with chaos resistance. Now, if you don't get amethyst rings because say they're too expensive, you can just keep this chaos wheel, and all you'll have to do is drop one of these medium clusters instead, and you'll drop about 10% damage or so, but you're not going to have any issues when it comes to your chaos resistance, because playing with -60 is definitely not something I recommend. So that's about it for the 100x version. And then if you want to go really big, I'll have about a 300x version, which is what I'm currently running, where you start getting into some real big boy stuff. Your items are getting more and more perfect. You're getting some very specific rolls on your gear, like onslaught on your boots, which allow you to drop the silver flask, get some bottled faith action, better and better items overall. And yeah, this is going to be about a 300x, which is what I'm personally rocking currently, and I would say that it's more damage than you'll ever need. This thing, again, you saw earlier, the 6-man HP Maven, it's trivial, and we can still get about 40% more damage than this PoB if we go with a truly perfect PoB, which is something that I'm actually considering, but we'll see if I actually go ahead and pull the trigger. So yeah, again, all the links for everything I've mentioned is going to be in the description. Huge shout out to Somayd again, and of course all the links to the actual different budget on the PoBs. Now you'll see that I'm actually going to have these links as PoE Ninja. Now this is a new feature that PoE Ninja has. It allows you to actually generate builds via PoE Ninja, but it works the exact same way. You'll just kind of copy the PoE Ninja build, and then you can just import it from the website, and it's going to work the exact same way. It's just, the only difference is that I believe there's a less of a limit, and I keep getting limited from Payspin, which is why I'm starting to use the PoE Ninja option instead. But yeah, that's pretty much it for my guide on the actual Omni Shot, Tornado Shot. It's definitely one of my favorite builds to date. I'm not sure if I like this more than I like my General Cry from last league, but it's very close. I have done wave 30 simulacrums on this build. I have done, of course, pretty much every single bit of content in the game. It's actually surprisingly tanky because of how much damage it has. But yeah, wave 30 simulacrums, doable. Even with tank mods, we have so much damage that it doesn't really matter. And of course, once we get into the super high-end budgets, we can actually start using the Watcher's Eye with Vitality light gain for each enemy hit, which is kind of like old Valpact. As long as we're shooting, we have so many arrows that we're actually like instantly leeching something like 300, 400, 500 life per shot. So it's just ridiculous, and as long as we don't get completely one-shotted, we're kind of immortal on this super high-end budget. But again, all those links in the description. Now, as always, before I go, I do want to say a massive thank you to my supporters. So Jacob, Alex, Max, Hamad, Rascoro, Brandon, welcome back, Thomas, Nate, the Great Master, Alex, the other Alex, Tim, Mercury, Johnny, Gary Fish, Nailed, the Arsonist, and Bizen, as well as anybody else who has supported me in the past. anybody else who wishes to remain anonymous, and of course anybody else who is missing on this list, as I have yet to have updated it. Because I completely forgot. But a huge, massive thank you for the support lately. I really, really appreciate it. If you want to catch me live on stream, you can do so in the link in the description as well. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.